Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Britain's major car manufacturers are meeting today amidst a warning from industry leaders that Brexit fears have halved investment over the past year. Spending in the first 6 months of 2018 was just over £347 million. That's compared to £647 million for the first half of last year, according to the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders. Our business correspondent, Adam Parsons, is at the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders International Automotive Summit in central London. And Adam Parsons, if you put together Airbus, BMW and now the motor manufacturers, it does seem that there's a pretty concerted message coming from manufacturing industry.
That's exactly what I think we're seeing here, Adam. The SMMT is normally a pretty sanguine sort of organisation. My understanding, though, is that their members, the automobile companies in this country, whether they make cars or make components, have been getting frustrated with what they see as being the government's lack of action, and effectively told the SMMT, go out there and put both barrels up in the air, which is what has happened. So the chief executive, Mike Hawes, has just delivered the opening speech, and it is pretty clear what he's saying. Brexit is holding us back, he told the audience. He said there is no Brexit dividend. He said that recent strong figures in the auto industry have been a result of decisions made 4 or 5 years ago, but his contention was that now we are seeing the percolation of the result of the Brexit referendum. Jobs going, investment declining, and nervousness across the industry. Now, what Mike Hawes said was a year ago, he said, we can't allow this to drag, and it has dragged. So he is now rather urgently calling for decision-making, because what he says is that his members are being told across Europe that the rules are changing to their disadvantage, that plenty of states are suggesting that they're planning now, or plenty of companies as well as states, are now planning for a hard Brexit, for a no-deal Brexit. And what Mike Hawes ended up with doing was effectively, I think, asking for almost an infinite transition period, because he said what we have to stick with is what we have at the moment until something else comes along. We must retain membership of the customs union, he said. We must have the benefits of the single market. We must have frictionless trade. Our position, he said, is simple. Until the government can demonstrate exactly how a new model for customs and trade with the EU and the 40 or so other markets, he said, which it has FTAs, free trade agreements, can replicate the benefits we now enjoy, don't change it. To me, that sounds like him calling for a long transition period, which tries to replicate, as he says there, all the benefits that the car industry in this country has at the moment. And as you said, Adam, there's no surprise here that BMW have already said something very similar. Airbus have said that they will look to withdraw jobs from this country if they don't get a Brexit deal that they feel helps them. Unipart have suggested that they are extremely frustrated. We are now seeing corporate Britain beginning to turn on the government. And of course, as we all know, this comes just after Boris Johnson made a somewhat disparaging comment, so we are told, about British business. The war seems to have just rumbled into life.
Adam Parsons, thank you very much indeed.
Back to our main story now. The investment in the British motor industry has fallen by nearly 50% in a year, with uncertainty over Brexit being blamed. The Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders said money earmarked this year for new models and facilities was almost half as much as in 2017. We're joined now by Peter Campbell, motor industry correspondent for the Financial Times. Peter, thanks very much for taking the time to speak to us today. How worried are they, really? This statement today, obviously blaming Brexit, but are they really, really concerned, or is this just a bit more scaremongering?
Well, no, the car industry is a global business, and car makers in Britain are very concerned about the outlook after Brexit. It's worth remembering that almost every plant in Britain is dependent on selling cars to Europe. Many of the component makers here are dependent on exports, and all of the major car plants in Britain are also dependent on Europe for many of their imported components. So the trading relationship with Europe could not be more important. Now, all of those car manufacturers are looking to the government for assurances of whether their cars will be stopped at ports and borders to pay tariffs and face checks. They have no certainty around that now. And that is why all of those that can afford to are sitting on their hands when it comes to making new investments in the industry. Now, we've seen the figures halve in the last year, but actually they've been falling ever since the referendum. In the year before the referendum, 2015, £2.5 billion was invested in the UK automotive industry. By last year, that had fallen to 1.1 billion. So money is already flowing out of the UK because of this. And many of these manufacturers cannot afford to wait indefinitely to make decisions. If they don't make spending decisions on new car models they'll bring out, then those products will be late to market and will set those manufacturers back against their competitors. So when the SMMT says today that they're worried, they're absolutely telling the truth.
However, the government have said in a statement today, and indeed many Brexiteers would also point to the fact that Nissan, Toyota, BMW, Vauxhall have all recently committed to investing billions of pounds in the UK, and this phrase that always pops up, despite Brexit.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. Britain has historically got some of the best car plants in the world. Every time manufacturers make a new model, their plants around the world and Europe compete for that work. Britain's always been good at winning that work, and that has carried on since Brexit. But the dangers that the industry are worried about is any hit to competitiveness, anything that makes those plants less profitable, such as facing tariffs, such as facing difficulties of getting supply parts in, makes Britain less likely to win work next time that comes up. Those investments have been made by Nissan and others on the basis that their trading conditions will not change after Brexit. The government made the assurances to Nissan in a letter to the Japanese car maker. Once future investment decisions come up, such as a Honda, Jaguar Land Rover, a Mini, others that are facing investment decisions in the next few years, all of those have options for making cars outside the UK. And if at that time they're not convinced that the government can get them a deal that sees them trading freely with Europe, it's very likely they may send the work overseas. No one expects the car industry to face trouble immediately. But Mike Hawes, the boss of the SMMT, has used the phrase "death by 1,000 cuts." The danger is a slow and gradual decline of the industry as work trickles overseas. And the falling investments figures you've seen today are probably the start of that.
In response to the SMMT's words today, we're just hearing from Theresa May's spokesperson saying the government has made considerable steps to providing for as smooth and frictionless a Brexit as possible. Now, the SMMT basically came out and said, didn't they want the UK to stay in the customs union, the benefits of the single market. Does it need to be the customs union, or is some sort of new relationship with frictionless trade good enough for them?
Well, it depends entirely what you mean by frictionless trade. The way that Britain's car industry has developed is on the basis of having an open relationship with Europe. Parts come in from Europe, and they come on trucks, and they arrive at a car plant sometimes within 45 minutes of being put on the car. That is how tight the turnaround is in these car facilities. And anything that changes that, if those parts get stuck at port, that is a problem. Even the most preliminary customs checks will lead to inevitable delays. And this is why the SMMT has today said that talks of a customs deal, a customs union, are simply not good enough. That the relationship that has grown up with free and completely frictionless trade with Europe is what the car industry requires to keep operating at the internationally competitive level it currently does. Now, the government can promise all it wants to try and do a good deal, but while it's drawn red lines around leaving the customs union and the single market, it's very difficult to balance that with offering a good deal to the auto industry that manages to keep the trading relationship with Europe as it is today.
OK. Peter Campbell, thank you very much for your time.
Not at all. Thank you.
Let's get a bit more now on our main story today. Investment in the British motor industry has fallen by nearly 50% in a year, with uncertainty over Brexit being blamed. The Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders said money earmarked this year for new models and facilities was almost half as much as in 2017. We're joined now by David Bailey, academic economist at the Aston Business School. Thanks very much indeed for your time today. Is it true to say that the industry as a whole is blaming Brexit? Because we have the situation where Nissan, Toyota, BMW and Vauxhall have invested billions of pounds.
They've invested very heavily in recent years, but we've seen a decline in the amount of investment coming into the UK. It's halved as compared to last year, which in turn was down on before the Brexit referendum. And if you look at some of the big investment last year, for example, the investment by Toyota, that decision was made before the referendum. So we've seen, I think, a lot of uncertainty starting to stall investment in the industry. And if that goes on for much longer, I think we could see a loss in potential models being made in the UK and a loss in the ability of the UK to attract future investment.
Criticism from some members of the government as to the public nature of this announcement, and indeed whether they are saying the same things, the car industry leaders, to Brussels. It seems to be all directed at the UK government, where they could be directing some of it towards the EU as well.
Well, I think the car industry's been very clear on this. Right before the referendum, they were clear on how important access to the European single market is and membership of the customs union. They've been saying exactly the same thing ever since, consistently. So from their point of view, they want to remain inside the customs union to make sure that there's a flow of components to plants in the UK and vice versa, and also to keep as much of the single market as possible to make sure that other regulations and issues don't get in the way of free trade. Now, that has been very, very clear. I think there's increasing frustration that there isn't a trade deal as yet, and the government hasn't made it clear what form of trade deal they want with Europe, and they're having to sort of postpone investment decisions amidst this uncertainty.
Well, the government want a good deal with the EU that's mutually beneficial, allows for the most free and frictionless trade with our European neighbours. Now, the SMMT effectively would like to stay in the customs union by the sounds of things, but if it was a solution that allowed the just-in-time manufacturing to stay as it is, would it really matter whether it was the customs union as it exists now or a new arrangement?
Well, I think at the moment the problem is the government hasn't really spelt out how it would do that. So if you leave the customs union, how do you preserve the benefits of just in time by not being in the customs union? And that's what the car industry can't yet understand. So, there's over 1,000 trucks a day coming into the UK. Honda alone receives something like 2 million components. Ordered anything between 5 hours and 24 hours before they come in from Europe. Now, if you can't have that, then the implications for the industry are huge in terms of having to stockpile components, the extra costs it will involve, and possibly having to shift production around and maybe even stop production in the UK. So, they're having to make big investment decisions when there's a lot of uncertainty, and the government has not spelt out clearly what we're going to see in the future.
OK, David Bailey from the Aston Business School, thank you.